There's an old line from one of Ronald Reagan's press conferences that you've probably heard before. He's talking about trade embargoes and inflation and how farmers in Illinois are being impacted by government policy. And he begins with one of his trademark quotes by saying, the 9 most terrifying words in English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. And the line obviously resonated, and it's quite well known and famous now, and not just with the farmers who were watching that press conference in Chicago. Anyone who's ever interacted with the government understood immediately what Reagan was getting at. Most of the time, when the government gets more involved in your life for whatever reason, it's a good indicator that things are about to get worse. And normal people are frightened of that possibility for good reason. At the same time, Reagan's one-liner raised a question that until now has gone unanswered. And that question is this: if everyday people are mortally terrified of government intervention in their lives, then what exactly do government bureaucrats fear above all else? What short, unassuming sentence could possibly terrorize the entire federal workforce in the same way that the government is capable of terrorizing everyday people and people in the private sector? Well, a couple of days ago, courtesy of Elon Musk and Doge, we learned the answer to those questions. We finally learned how to usher in a state of total panic in the federal government in just a few short words. It turns out that all you need to do, if you want federal bureaucrats to melt down in a very public and humiliating fashion, is ask them what they did last week. That's it. To bring the entire federal bureaucracy to its knees, you just need to pose a question that every single private sector worker on the planet is able to answer and knows they must be able to answer or they will be fired. As you may have seen by now, here's the email that I'm talking about. It was sent by the Office of Personnel Management, which is essentially the HR department of the federal government. And it was clearly drafted by Elon Musk, who famously asked this same question to the old CEO of Twitter before Musk took over and fired him. But here's what the email looked like. Very, very simple. As you can see, it reads, please reply to this email with approximately 5 bullets of what you accomplished last week and CC your manager. Now, you will not find a less threatening, more straightforward question that an employer could possibly ask an employee. I struggle to think of any remotely productive worker in any context who would have any difficulty answering this question. You know, a janitor could say he mopped 5 floors. A plumber could say he fixed 5 toilets. A restaurant worker could say he served a certain number of tables and so on. A lawyer or consultant or anyone else with an hourly rate could produce a timesheet that outlines everything he did at every single moment of the day. Okay, well, maybe a consultant couldn't do that, but most workers in the private sector, both white collar and blue collar, can and often must answer questions like this. But for many federal workers, this email is an existential threat. And that's because, unlike the overwhelming majority of workers in this country in the private sector, they, in many, though not all cases, don't do anything. And to this point, have not been expected to do anything. They just shuffle papers around and wait until their pensions vest. This is something that's considered impolite to say out loud, I guess, but everybody knows it's true. In many cases, these federal jobs function like a kind of welfare that's designed specifically to provide fake jobs to certain demographics. And that's not some right-wing conspiracy theory, by the way. Spend 5 minutes reading left-wing media, and you'll find this statement isn't even controversial. I mean, they come out and admit it. For example, here's a report this week from NBC BLK, which is NBC News division that produces reports for black people, which is something that exists for some reason, I guess. And we'll put it on screen. The headline reads, quote, much of the black middle class was built by federal jobs. That may change. For the last several decades, federal jobs helped black workers find stable work with guardrails to prevent bias, but mass cuts are threatening decades of upward mobility. In other words, yes, these federal jobs don't really benefit the taxpayers who are funding the salaries. Instead, they benefit certain demographics that without these fake jobs would not make anywhere near as much money. In their panic over Elon Musk, Democrats and the corporate press are finally just coming out and admitting that. And as you expect, they're going to fight like hell to keep that gravy train going. Some federal workers have just filed a lawsuit against the government because of the email asking them what they do all day. Yes, rather than answer an extremely basic question that demands a bare minimum of accountability, federal workers would rather go to court. As Axios reports, quote, federal workers sue over what did you do last week email. Only federal agencies have the ability to hire and fire their workers. The lawsuit says the Office of Personnel Management, the federal government's HR office, which sent out the email over the weekend, does not have that authority, the suit alleges. They're specifically objecting to Elon Musk's statement that if workers don't answer the email, it'll be taken as a resignation. They're arguing, in essence, that federal workers are entitled to ignore emails from their bosses asking them what they do all day. That is the extent of entitlement that we're dealing with here. And by the way, these workers are getting a second chance to answer the email. Now Musk has clarified that, quote, subject to the discretion of the president, they will be given another chance. Failure to respond a second time will result in termination. So they get another chance. And it looks like if they want to keep their jobs, these workers should just take it. Already, several federal departments have told their employees that they need to reply to this email. The Department of Transportation has instructed workers to reply. So has the Department of Health and Human Services, the Social Security Administration, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and many others. But there are signs that throughout the federal government, many workers will simply be incapable of answering this email. They legitimately cannot think of a single thing they did in the past week that was productive, apparently. And that's probably terrible news for their careers. But it's good news for us because if nothing else, their televised meltdowns have been pretty entertaining. So we'll start with this indignant woman on CNN who works at some unnamed federal agency, and she's very upset about this. Watch.
First, just tell us about this email and what it was like receiving it and what you all have talked about after getting it.
Sure. I got this email Saturday afternoon, about 3 p.m., and I felt absolutely infuriated getting this email with a demand within 48 hours to provide a response on what I did within the last week or face termination. This is clearly an attempt from Elon Musk to harass and bully and intimidate the federal workforce, which is part of his broader plan to gut the federal workforce and privatize public sector services to ensure that corporations like his own can get more profit. And that makes me really angry, and my coworkers as well.
These spoiled brats. I mean, it's amazing. They just can't help themselves. Yeah, the plan is to gut the federal workforce, and this is, you are why, lady. You're the reason why we want to gut the federal workforce, is exactly because of you and people like you. Infuriated that she's being asked to simply, what did you do last week? With the taxpayer money, we are paying you. It's our money out of our pockets to do a job. What did you do the job? What is the job? What did you do? That's the question. Now, evidently, this woman has a lot of time to appear on CNN and claim that she's being bullied and harassed, and she's absolutely infuriated. But even after talking through this whole segment, she still never explains what she does all day. Instead, she attacks her supervisors, which is, again, it can't be emphasized enough. In the private sector, you would not get away with this. If your boss comes up to you at your job and says, well, "Hey, what did you do last week?" and you said, "Well, I'm infuriated that you even asked me that question. How dare you? How dare you expect me to explain what I'm doing with the money you're paying me to do the job that I'm? How dare you?" If you responded that way, you would just be fired. And of course, this woman is just one of many examples. On Reddit, federal workers are posting various plans for non-compliance and retaliation. They're talking about ways to spam the federal email system, for example. One viral post, which was picked up by CNN, reports that some federal workers may be considering leaking top secret information to foreign adversaries. That's how committed they are to public service. Okay? Rather than explain what they've done last week, they would rather commit treason. That's what they would prefer. And what's especially funny about this whole meltdown is that a few years ago, documents obtained by the investigative reporter Patrick Hauff found that 25% of federal workers went a full month without even attempting to check their emails during the COVID lockdowns. So they just went dark. A full month. So really, you could make the case, as Musk has, that these emails are necessary just to make sure these workers are still alive. This is like proof of life. We just want to make, are you alive and opening your laptops at least every once in a while? But apparently that's too much for these workers to deal with. They're worried that if they have to answer the email honestly, they might lose their jobs. Thousands of probationary federal workers have already met that fate. In particular, terminated workers at the IRS are having some of the better meltdowns. Here's one of them, which was posted by NBC Philadelphia. Watch.
It was an illegal firing. My performance was good. I was doing everything I was supposed to be doing. I was even one of those government employees that went every day of the week. I had to report every Monday through Friday, 7 to 3:30. That was my tour of duty, and that's what I served. And here I am.
Did you get? I was one of those government employees who went to work every day. One of those. Yeah, no, but that's exactly the problem. I was even one of those federal workers who went to work every day. No, but that shouldn't be one of those. That should just be all of them. That's not. That shouldn't be like a type of federal worker. That shouldn't be a special category. I was one of those special ones who actually went to work every day, Monday through Friday. Yes, this IRS worker stated that he was shocked to be fired because he actually showed up to work 5 days a week. That was his tour of duty, as he put it. These are people who legitimately think they're storming the beaches of Normandy just by going into an office building on a regular schedule. They cannot imagine a scenario in which normal people don't see them as war heroes because they leave home and commute to their job and occasionally conduct audits that make people's lives a living hell and then punch out at 3:30 in the afternoon. Okay, they have a schedule about as grueling as a third grader. That's when elementary schoolers get home, is 3:30. So this seems to be something of a trend at the IRS. Here's another recently terminated IRS worker with his sob story.
I was just in training. I waited 4 months to go to training just to be fired.
He's one of 6,000 plus federal employees who work for the Internal Revenue Service fired this week as part of mass layoffs happening under the Trump administration. The majority of those workers, like Charles, were probationary workers employed for less than a year. Charles told us more than 24 employees were laid off from his office here off Gessner. He says it took over a year to get his dream job as a tax-exempt officer dealing with nonprofit organizations and compliance. His pride and passion taken away.
Excited. I was so excited to learn the job. I was telling my management I was going to be the best. They can count on me. And it's not like I have no say-so. Like they just toss you away. And I thought corporate America was like this, not the government. I thought the government takes care of their people.
So did you catch his dream job? He was a tax-exempt officer dealing with nonprofit organizations and compliance. That's what he's crying about on national television. You know, that this was his dream that has been shattered. This was his, his pursuit of happiness, kind of story. And, growing up, some people want to be astronauts. Some kids want to be race car drivers. They want to be, they want to be heroes. They want to be, but not this guy. He dreamt of becoming a tax-exempt officer dealing with nonprofit organizations and compliance. That's how he thought he would serve the American people as he sits there in sweatpants with his smoke detector beeping, which is so on the nose that I thought that was a joke. I had to look up to see if that beep was in the original video. It is. Some stereotypes just are stereotypes for a reason. In fact, they almost all are. And then, of course, there's the part where he explains that, in his understanding, the federal government took care of its people, unlike corporate America. In other words, he thought he'd score a permanent job with no accountability whatsoever. That was actually his dream, right? He wasn't actually dreaming of enforcing compliance on nonprofits or whatever. He was dreaming about having a job where there was no accountability. None of these people can hear themselves speaking. None of them understand what they're acknowledging. In reality, they're making the case for their terminations better than Elon or Donald Trump possibly could. They're more or less stating that they don't do anything. But to be fair to the federal government, there are some exceptions. There are some employees, particularly employees in the federal intelligence agencies, who have been very busy in recent years. And I'm talking specifically about the National Security Agency, or NSA. And We know they've been busy at the NSA because the City Journal just obtained chat logs from the agency's top secret internal messaging system. As the City Journal has just reported, quote, these logs dating back 2 years are lurid, featuring wide-ranging discussions of sex, kink, polyamory, and castration. One popular chat topic was male-to-female transgender surgery, which involves surgically removing the penis and turning it into an artificial vagina. Mine is everything, said one male who claimed to have had gender reconstruction surgery. Another intelligence official boasted that genital surgery allowed him to wear leggings or bikinis without having to wear a gaff under it. These employees discussed hair removal, estrogen injections, and the experience of sexual pleasure post-castration. It goes on from there. So at least we know what the NSA has been up to. So if you ask them what they did, what their 5 things were last week, it's a list that none of us would want to read, but they would be able to list it. And if we're being honest, we all know that this kind of thing was going on at many other federal agencies. If it was happening at the NSA, supposedly one of the more serious federal agencies, then it was happening all over. None of these federal workers ever thought they'd be held accountable for what they do all day. And that's because for more than a century, thanks in part to various Supreme Court decisions, the idea of an ever-expanding, vast federal bureaucracy has been taken as a given in this country. Nobody thought it could ever be reined in. The federal government assumed just more and more powers and, quote, civil service protections and so on, and, no one ever did anything about it. But despite what you may have been told, the Constitution does not require any of this. Instead, the Constitution empowers the executive to run the executive branch, which employs every single one of these perverts, narcissists, and incompetents. No judge, no lawsuit, no act of Congress, certainly no CNN appearance can circumvent the constitutional separation of powers that gives the executive branch that control. What we're seeing now, which is something that we should have seen a long time ago, is an executive branch that's finally willing to exercise that control. Now let's get to our 5 headlines. Yesterday,